Hi there, this is Sue from the Human Collaborative. Welcome to the webinar on Optus Australia. This is a story of their journey of implementing Contractor Central a year ago, collaborating with us and then working to stabilise their program and build a roadmap for the next 12 months. I'm sure you'll find it informative and insightful for your journey too. I hope you enjoy it.
Well, welcome everybody to today's session. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. For me, this is the peoples of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and invite you all to say hello to each other in the chat function by letting us know where you're dialing in from. Thank you. So it's my great pleasure today to help us all learn a bit more about how Optus Australia implemented, then stabilised their Contingent Workforce Program called Contractor Central. I am your host, Rob Dunderdale. It sounds really glamorous. I'm loving it. I'm currently the head of TA at KPMG, and I've been fortunate enough to know these two quite well for quite some time. So I'm more than happy to ask the curly questions that you want to get answers to. So without further ado, let's introduce our panelists. First of all, we've got Alissa Patoulio on the call. Alissa's career in talent spans 2 decades across multi-sectors. She has built and led teams in every organisation she's been part of and has a knack for taking big, complex challenges, understanding them, breaking them down and driving sustainable change. As Senior Director of Talent at Optus Australia, having a holistic view of talent, including the contingent workforce, is critical to the execution of the business strategy. This is why leading the stabilisation and maturity of Contractor Central is so important to Alissa and the whole Optus talent team. And last but by no means least, we have Sue Howse. So for over 25 years, Sue has worked across TA contingent workforce solutions, both globally and locally, with outsourced and in-house programs. Sue now leads the Human Collaborative and is also very hands-on, imparting her expertise working directly with clients, myself too in the past, on helping them unpack their business strategy to design and deliver their talent strategy. So before we crack on, I do have a couple of housekeeping rules. This is probably where I tell you where the fire escape is in the old world pre-COVID, but I don't know where they are, so please do keep yourselves safe in the next hour. I'll be running through a series of questions and asking them both of Alissa and Sue just to get to understand a bit more of what's been going on at Optus Australia with regards to Contractor Central. We have 2 live polls. I am not a Zoomer, so we do have some tech experts in the background helping us with those live polls.
Tech experts, me, so we'll see how we roll.
We may have 2 polls just to get an understanding of what we're all kind of struggling with from a contingent perspective as well. We've only got a couple of questions. We do want to make this as informative and useful as possible for you all. So please do use the Q&A functionality in the Zoom to ask any questions, and I'll get to those towards the end. It needs to be the Q&A function, not the chat function. For some reason, I don't know which, I'm not a Zoomer, but please use the Q&A and we'll get to them shortly. So without further ado, Alissa, first question for you. I understand that Optus has recently achieved a critical milestone with the implementation of Contractor Central for your contingent workforce. To set the scene for everyone, can you please let us know a bit more about the contingent workforce landscape at Optus?
Sure. So I've been trying to think about how I frame this up because it's, we've obviously got our contingent workforce and then we have and contractor workforce, but then we also have the environment that I joined 12 months ago. So I guess to give you a bit of an overview, Optus Australia and Optus in general relies on contractors pretty heavily as part of its workforce model. So we have our contingent workforce, we have folks that come and work with us under statements of work, and then we have our teams that are working with us under quite large sort of services agreements. So probably not necessarily that unique to other corporates. We typically have about sort of 600 odd contingent workers at any one time across a whole raft of different job families and spread across the entirety of the business. So you typically see a lot of project managers, engineers, IT delivery, but then of course we have our folks, across our corporate functions, etc. So on average about 600, and I know some of my contingent colleagues are on here, so I'm sure they're going to give me the exact numbers soon. They may correct me. I guess from a commercial perspective, the contractor workforce is also a pretty large spend across the business. So we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, whether it's contingent, whether it's statement of work or services. So actually, it's a pretty significant piece of work and program. When I joined, I joined Optus 12 months ago, and the Contractor Central program had just gone live, as in literally sort of 2 weeks after prior to me joining. So it was definitely a entry on fire, because I actually am not a contingent expert at all. I think most recruitment leaders like yourself, Rob, we've always had responsibilities for casual teams, agency spend, supplier relationships, but I hadn't actually walked into or managed something so significant from both a commercial value and sort of a size of workforce. And I actually had never worked with a VMS, so a vendor management system. And so when I joined, the Optus had actually just gone live with Beeline. We'd chosen Beeline as the vendor management system. And so as I said, I literally walked in and it was a very unique experience for me. The project team who had put together the proposal and had done the business engagement with Optus, they had been consulting, from what I can see from the project perspective, for well over 12 months. But the way that Optus is structured is that we had sort of one chunk of business under a reporting line, and we had a second chunk of business that had a different reporting line. And so when the team had done all of the discovery and system development for the vendor management system, they had particularly done it for one big chunk of the business. But like all businesses, we walk into some complexity, and, you know, they can shift and change at any one time. And of course, at the time of implementation, Optus had actually made a strategic direction to bring both teams together under one sort of leadership structure. So what that meant was that when we actually went live, there was a whole chunk of business scenarios that we hadn't necessarily accounted for. So there was different contract types, there was different workers, there was different sort of arrangements in place. And quite frankly, we hadn't necessarily engaged a significant part of that business. So they knew it was coming, but when we went live, there were some people that were well embedded in the journey, and there were others that were like, well, we just got told this was being turned on and we had to use it, and we're not necessarily happy about it. So that was kind of my experience coming in. Pretty big spend, pretty decent size of workforce, brand new system gone live, limited experience, a brilliant team sitting behind it who also were just new to trying to figure out how the actual system worked. But you can imagine there was quite a number of issues that we were walking into. So yes, an entry by fire.
Totally. I was just going to say that. I mean, walking into a new job with a large spend on your back, responsible for the ROI from day one, and really had a bit of change management to do there. It's not an easy task, and that's a great segue to you, Sue. So obviously the human collaborative you've recently set up. Can you tell us about the human collaborative and the project that you've just recently completed with Optus from your perspective?
Sure, thanks, Rob. The human collaborative launched just about 3 months ago, but the business that I set up has now we're in our 5th year, right? So an independent consulting firm. And to be honest, the human collaborative has been in the making for about 1.5 years, and then we launched it early this year, which is essentially a small team of experts that sit across the entire employee lifecycle as consultants. We've all worked together for many, many years and have got decades and decades of experience in workforce strategy, contingent workforce programs, talent acquisition, optimization, tech selection, the whole suite, right? And so Alissa and I have known, it feels like a long time. We've been through lots of stuff together, right? So we've probably known each other for, 2 or 3 years. And when Alissa started at Optus, we were having one of our regular sort of catch-ups and seeing what was going on in the world. I think I was checking in to see how you were traveling in your first little period there. And I think what you explained to me is essentially what you've just articulated, right? That We've gone live. It's a major hurdle to go live, as we all know, in any program that you're deploying or new tech, or as you go through phases of transformation. And we just got together at campus, didn't we, at Optus at North Ryde, Macquarie Park, and had a coffee, had a chat about where you were at. And I guess by the end of that session, or the end of that discussion, we realised that, the team that I have and the expertise that I've got in the business, we could really help the Optus Contractor Central team to take them on their journey for the next, I say horizon, right? So there was probably a number of horizons, weren't there, Alissa? And a number of forks in the road and hurdles and small celebrations along the way too. But what we agreed at that point in time was that in order to really stabilise the program and look at where to from here, we needed to get under the bonnet a little bit. And the beauty of the program having been live for a little while, I think we had 3 months data, Alissa, from memory, which we could really start to look at what was working, what we were seeing, because for an organisation to have visibility, even early visibility, there's a lot of insights that we could take from that straight away. And to Alissa's intro there, the segments of that non-employee workforce, the contractors, the contingents that are through suppliers or payrolling providers for Optus, was about 600 or so, 600 to 700. But we knew there are thousands of workers that were put into the system because the priority was, let's get visibility of our workforce. But we needed to go back in and say, okay, we designed this, prior to any of this project team, designed the program, designed the requirements, deployed with the sponsorship and engagement at the level that it could be at that time. And then we had to go back and have a look to see where to from here, which is essentially what my team and I did. We engaged with Alissa and the exec sponsors. We did a series of discovery activities across about a 4 to 6 week period with the business, and really identified the level of maturity, the level of readiness for the next phase of change. And then we proposed a few scenarios to the stakeholders for their consideration. And that's where we decided really where to from here, wouldn't you suggest, Alissa?
Yeah, it was. And look, I think whenever you start a new job, you're learning the business as well. And so it was literally a bit of an uppercut when I walked in. I was just like, oh my God. And it's a running joke with myself and my leader that no one sold me the contingent part of this job. Because as I said, I wasn't an expert in this field. But, it's certainly something that I have leaned into and learnt so much. And as I said, we've got a really fabulous team that sit behind the Contractor Central program. But the reality was we were all new. We were all new in terms of the VMS. We were new to the whole of business landscape. I think there was some brilliant work done in terms of scenario planning, and understanding, the procurement contracts, the service types, the worker types, the processes on how to engage, how to offboard, how to do all the relevant things with a chunk of the business. But then at the point of going live, we're bringing everybody on board, and we just hadn't done enough of the discovery on the other part of the business. And I think it's not unique. I think we all work in organizations where the reality is business units always have some sort of niche process. They're unique and they get to do some sort of workaround, and we hadn't planned for a whole raft of those. I think also to add fuel to the fire was, unfortunately, the project manager left sort of 6 weeks after the program had gone live. And at the time that I caught up with Sue, I was like, oh my God, I've started this new job, loving Optus. It's such a great culture. The people are brilliant. I'm learning a lot, but new to telco, new to tech. And I've now got this big piece of work. And the reality is it was bubbling. We were starting to get some things from our suppliers who, by the way, are again, great partners, but they're like, oh, we're starting to get a few errors and issues, and we're not sure how to diagnose it through this new system. Of course, our system speaks directly with our finance system, which again was a great development as part of the design. So as part of us putting in the VMS, the whole idea is that we can have a hiring manager put in a contingent request. We can work with our suppliers to identify the talent. We can timesheet, and we can push everything then through to our finance system, which we use SAP. So brilliant sort of overall design. But because we're sort of all new to the system, and then there's all these scenarios that we hadn't planned for, we're starting to see all these little bubbling issues, and we're like, how do we get to the root cause? Like, how do we unpack this? Because our accounts team are like, oh, the feed didn't work. And we, we're like, well, why didn't the feed work? And as I said, some suppliers were coming back to us, and some managers were like, I pressed a button and I don't know what button's working, So we had the team sort of triaging all sorts of things. And so, yeah, when I had a chance to catch up with Sue, it was kind of like that perfect timing. I was like, help me.
Yeah.
And I think that's the reality, right? We all have specialty skills. That wasn't my specialty skill, so I was like, I'm bringing a friend, dialing in a friend for this one, which is where.
And I think it seems like such a long time ago, because we've come such a long way in the last 10 months, right? That I do remember coming back not too shortly after that day, and we whiteboarded it out with the key sponsors and stakeholders, the executive sponsors, and said, well, here's your vision. And here's the roadmap on a whiteboard. I remember the front of the media centre down at campus there, and we mapped it all out and said, well, all this is possible. Where are our priorities, right? So if we think about the worker category type, so your contingent workers, your statement of work and service providers, we had thousands of contractors in the system, as I said earlier, but we had to decide how to prioritise what we now knew about all the challenges and issues post go live. Now that sounds negative, but it's not negative. The positive is that we were able, through a series of sessions, to identify, as you said, Alissa, what are the challenges from an invoice flow perspective? How do we make sure those integrations work? What needs to change? How do we put governance and structure in place to make sure that we get that right? The beauty of that is suppliers get paid damn fast, right? Now they do. Yeah, which is awesome,
now. Yeah.
Because the systems talk to each other. We know that we're still ironing out, on the roadmap that's now in place, other things to optimize different elements of the ecosystem. But what we came to pretty quickly was the most relevant part of that workforce that needed attention was that contractor workforce, right? So they are the daily paid contractors that have a significant role in Optus, like most organisations, and generally report to an Optus manager. Yep. Therefore, they've got day-to-day role and activity. Their connectivity is critical, the payment to them, the correct and accurate components of everything relating to them as a worker at Optus was our priority. So we dug deep pretty fast into what that looked like. And as Alissa said, the need to bring in the experts was very relevant. And, shout out to the VP of HR, Kate, your manager, Alissa, Kate Atkin, who was very fast to get a head around what we needed to do, and very comfortable in order to give us the green light with the business case to do that, which was really good, really positive.
And I think both, just to keep you on track here, I think we're 20 minutes in and still on the first question, but some other things I've taken away from what you've all just said, the getting the data and having that true visibility of your workforce, I'm sure made some people open their eyes and think, crikey, that's bigger than I thought. We've got to do something about this. Alissa, you're new, you're still building the relationships. You wanted to build your own brand. You needed to build it in the right way, in a skill set that potentially wasn't yours in the past. So Sue, it's great to bring some outside thinking in to kind of drive up that energy to get that investment piece as well.
So thank you, timekeeper Rob. Nice work.
I was trying to be subtle.
Yeah, it's fine. We don't
Moving on.
No worries. We've got a couple of questions in the Q&A. I'm going to hold off on those because we actually answer those in the next question. So I'm just going to punch out the first poll if that's okay. Let's see how this rolls. So I'm assuming that everyone on screen can now see the poll. The only people that can answer it are the participants, not any of us, Rob or Alissa. Hey, here we go. What have we got live? We've got a lot of independent consultants, a lot of people with agency service providers and others. Thank you, everyone. Really good. Everyone's so action-oriented. I love it.
Straight in.
All right. I think everyone's clicked their buttons. That's really interesting. So can everyone can see that, the live poll? Or can they? Let me end the poll. And share the results here.
There we go.
Okay. Here we go, Sue. There you go, technical.
Yep.
Sue. This is really interesting. So if you turn your head to the right, it's kind of a traditional bell curve, or not quite a bell curve, right? So I think that there's a significant rise that I see in businesses of exactly what's here, which is independent consultants.
Yes.
The barriers to entry for non-employee workers is not hard, right? People have relationships. It's interesting, the growing method of sourcing non-employees is via networks, and therefore many people that can operate as independent consultants can set themselves up and work the right way and engage with businesses. It's really about how putting those in a program of this nature gives visibility, governance, and good quality overall program engagement. A lot of agency contractors still, service workers or service providers. I guess that really depends on the nature of those, you guys on the call here. But what we find typically is that the service workers or service providers, once you start to get visibility of that, are generally much higher than your agency contractors or your independent consultants. But I think that landscape is changing with independents. I don't know what you guys see. Rob, you're from a consulting.
I mean, the thing that I first thought when I looked at this was, are we making it easy enough for independent contractors to do business with us? Because I see the trend going more towards independent consultants for sure. Yeah,
which has a heightened level of flexibility and pace, right? But with that comes potential risks if you can't see who those workers are. Have they got the insurance coverage? Are they operating in an environment that is compliant to your workforce requirements and legislative?
Are they operating the way we work? It's a huge beast to solve for.
Yeah, thanks guys. We'll share the results, of course. Good to see.
Perfect. Thanks, team. So on to the next question. Alissa, I think we'll come back to you first, if that's okay, and then Sue, anything that you've got to add.
Sure.
So Alissa, we may have touched on this slightly just before, but why was it important for you to choose a specialist to help you with this project?
Oh, look, I think for all of the reasons shared, as in new to workforce, I just didn't have the level of expertise, and the contingent function is only one part of my entire role and responsibility. And so, something that's so important to the business, that has such significant sort of commercial value and is obviously such a great part of our total workforce strategy. I just needed to bring in someone that could actually have the time to really focus on it. It was really detailed. It wasn't just like, oh yeah, I know exactly what to do, I'll just change this or reconfigure it or whatnot. It was actually a piece of work that we needed to get under the hood of and get into the detail and sort of chase the bouncy ball on, okay, well, why is this not quite connecting the dots, or what is happening over in that part of the business that we haven't accounted for. So it was something that required sort of the focus, the expertise, and I certainly didn't have the bandwidth to be able to do that. I think the other thing is, obviously, commercially, it is a significant spend. And when we had originally put the program in place, and I've gone back to look at what did the team put up as the things that we wanted to deliver on, and they were what's been mentioned today. We wanted full visibility of our workforce. We wanted to know, and the comment in Optus is, we need to know how many people it takes to turn the lights on.
Yeah.
That was one thing that we really wanted to know, and I'm sure everyone else is probably in the same space. We absolutely wanted to drive the compliance. We wanted everybody onboarded. We wanted to reduce any risk that was associated with our engagements with, our contracting workforce. And we wanted to have full visibility of business behaviour and spend. And so we knew that when we had gone live, that some of those things were absolutely, we weren't concerned about. We knew that actually the onboarding was really smooth. We could see people into the system. We were starting to see breakdowns through the way the system was configured into, insurances, superannuation. So we could start to see that stuff. But we really did need to bring in someone that had the expertise to get under the hood and start really looking at sort of the onesies and twosies that were adding up to, the hundreds and whatnot. And I, as I said, didn't have the expertise necessarily, bandwidth. It was like a perfect storm. And And Sue's right, you know, the team that had originally put the project proposal together had done a brilliant job. There was great executive sponsorship. The business wanted this and they wanted it to work. And so really it made every sense to get someone in to come and support it.
Yeah. And that's great that you got the exec sponsorship, and I think you'll probably feel the same, Alissa, that we are greater than the sum of our parts, especially in the contingent world where it's hugely complex. Sue, any additional thoughts?
Oh yes, Rob, thanks.
Two.
I think it was a multi-pronged approach. So remember, Alissa has said that when she started, we went live, or the Contractor Central had gone live, and the person that was leading it had moved on, right? So we had a gap immediately. So through my network and our team's network, we found an interim manager for Contractor Central who started pretty well straight away. And she's on the call. So kudos to that young lady. You know who you are.
And who arrived at Optus, and I knew nothing about her, and I just gave her the biggest hug. I was like,
yes, you trusted me.
and hugging you all the way to your seat.
So that was really important, to have someone that really understood, and this particular person is a part of the network, you know, really deep expertise in holistic workforce management, specifically contingent workforce programs, large scale. So no surprises, right, when this person started and joined with Alissa. However, you know, it was really early days. So at that point, Alissa and I were scoping out the work that me and my team were doing, and then quickly identified. So we're not operators. The Human Collaborative, we don't operate programs. We've got a lot of experience there, and decades of experience, but we're pure independent consultants focusing on advisory, right? And I knew what was needed. That needed to be a absolute expert in Beeline to work through this, that this is something they knew intimately. And Beeline were great in supporting the ongoing, you know, needs of day to day, but also supporting what we needed to do in the long run. And someone that understood contingent workforce. So we reached out to Kelly OCG, who's a MSP expert, and a Beeline expert, which we could not have done this. So if you think about that, we've got executive sponsorship, we've got the Contractor Central team with the new head of, we've got my team in, and we've got the Beeline folks and part of the Kelly OCG team. It was a real team sport. And I think at one stage, Alissa said to me, man, there's so many people on this project right now. So like, we got the squad together, and then we'll start to sort of, you know, wean out what we don't need when we don't need it. And in all honest, you know, transparency, what we uncovered is not a surprise for many of us, but the work that we did with you, Alissa, the Contractor Central team and your stakeholders, to help them understand the task ahead and scoping that out with choices and scenarios, made it, I wouldn't say easy, but it made it clear on where we needed to prioritise the project. And we did have a couple of changes during the timeline too, Alissa. Remember, we had the panel renewal at that point in time that we wanted to incorporate in, so we rescoped. We reincorporated numbers of sort of sideline activities and issues that we identified along the way as well. And we also had a different configuration in the Singtel operation too of Beeline. So we needed to make sure that the Beeline expertise we had from Beeline, from Kelly OCG, and from the internal Optus team, we didn't break the Singtel configuration whilst we reconfigured what was needed in Australia. So yeah, it was definitely a collaboration of a team of experts that, you know, ebbed and flowed depending upon the stage of the project that we're at.
Yeah. Awesome to hear. Before we go on to the next question, I might go off piste, which if anyone knows me on the call knows this is where it gets a bit dangerous, because I can't find out or remember where I got to. But I'm keen to understand now, kind of knowing a bit more about what happened and how you came together to deliver this so well. What are the kind of key lessons that you learned? I think that the danger of these webinars is that we talk about the bells and whistles and all the great stuff, but we forget about the lessons.
You know, one of the things that I love about working with Optus is their absolute commitment to authenticity and, you know, happy to call out when things didn't necessarily go to plan and share our lessons learnt. So I think I think a couple of things. I think the project team that was originally did the proposal and got the executive sponsorship did a really great job. I think, like anything, completely underbaked perhaps the change management. And like anything, I think, I can see there's a number of attendees on the call, but that's the reality, right? When you're walking into a significant enterprise-wide technology change, you really need to make sure that you've got the right number of people and resources, not just for all the diagnostic and discovery, but certainly the go live and post go live support and the hypercare. I think we probably underbaked that, and as a result, obviously, we certainly brought in that support sort of as and when we needed it. But I think in reality, we should have had that planned. I think that the unfortunate circumstance of sort of the business changing its organizational structure and leadership, whilst actually it's one of those double-edged swords. It's like, oh my gosh, this is so difficult. We didn't plan for that. But now we're actually in a state where we've gone through, we've done the business engagement, we've done the diagnostic, we've reconfigured the system, and we've got it now to a place where actually we're good. We went through that pain, but at the time you're like, oh gosh, this is a challenge. So I think, again, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but a bit more around the scenario planning and business engagement. And I think the spending some time as a project team, maybe to go, even if we didn't think it was going to happen, like I think I've learned, like, let's forecast a couple of scenarios that could just turn on, that we are not necessarily live, but could happen, and make sure that we're prepared for that. I think it would be good. I think one of the things interesting at Optus, and I'm sure, again, I'm not speaking out of turn here, but we had multiple contracts and different contract variations, and sometimes with the same supplier, which is a bit odd. And I'm sure it's not unique, but we needed to spend, and again, in hindsight, really spend a lot of that pre-work time going through and understanding what are all the contracts, what are all the supplier relationships, what are all the terms and conditions, because in the VMS system, you're building in your margins, you're building in your pay breakdowns, and if you've got different scenarios or contracts or handshake agreements with people, it's really hard to make that system work for you, because that's when you start to spit up the errors. So look, I think there are a whole raft of things, and I'm sure I've got 2 team members who've been in the Contractor Central team since the go live, and I'm sure they will be sitting there saying, we absolutely needed some additional resources for that go live phase. It's literally just being able to have someone to triage the hiring manager and leader and supplier use of the system. So yeah, look, I think excellent work from the team to get it signed off, to get the executive sponsorship. I think where we fell short was we really didn't plan for and have enough resourcing for the go live and post go live period. I think that's a real lesson.
Yeah, Rob,
thanks,
can I add to that?
Of course. I'm sure you will anyway.
Yeah, I will. I agree, Alissa. The business case was solid. The intent was great. I think it was too much at the start, and it was drinking water from a fire hose. We all know what that feels like, having lived and breathed much of that. So the contingent workforce contractors, the resource tracking module that sits within the VMS, and then the service provider module that was laying dormant, we had to make some decisions. Although the business was telling us things aren't working for them in one area, we had to say, sorry, we need to do this part first and make sure that's stabilised before we move forward with others. So I don't know that I'd do anything vastly differently if we had the implementation or go live again, but maybe stage it a little bit. So for those, scoping that, those that are on the call that were part of that, this is a great learning opportunity for all of us, and hence we wanted to get together on that. So I think
as well, Sue, the other thing is, and again, it's also when you've got a bucket of money, you don't want the money to go. We all know we've been in those roles where all of a sudden you're like, okay, the business has given you the green light to spend some money. And so you're like, well, I'm spending it. It's going, and so I think, to your point, we were like, we're just going to buy it all. We're just going to do it because we don't know when this scenario or business
Gonna go
cycle is
away,
going to
yeah.
come around again.
Yeah.
And we bought it all. But we just were not in a position to make everything go live as effectively as we wanted it to.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the other learns that we had with that quite a diverse members of the project team, we had a proper project structure, right? We had a steerco, we had our project teams, work streams, and all the bits that you'd expect to see there. I think, Alissa, when we did our post-project review, we probably should have done one mid-project.
Yeah.
We were almost finished, and then do another one, because I think you were pretty firm with our team, the whole team, that said, you guys needed to push me harder. You needed to tell me, I mean, you got a million things on your plate, right? And I remember my text messages to you, there's something in your inbox. If you don't have time to read it, trust me, hit approve. I'll tell you about it tomorrow on the project call, because we really needed to keep things moving. Yeah. So I think the great thing there is trusted relationships of experts, where I would just, and Alissa and others in the project team as well would, and we had some pretty serious debates. There was a lot of complexity in the stabilisation requirements, right? Throw in the supplier review that you just spoke about, Alissa, which was partnering with procurement, doing that at the same time, actually delayed the go live of the sort of phase of the stabilisation. And that was a bit of a debate, wasn't it, Alissa, for us to get through too? Do we push it? Do we push out harder? Do we push the suppliers? And that wasn't the right thing to do, you know. Optus's supplier ecosystem is critical to their strategy. So, you know, and you were really firm on that, Kate, your VP was really firm on, and procurement. Well, we need to make sure that we've got the suppliers on board for this, and to ensure that it goes live right in stage 2, which is, you know, after stabilisation. And we had superannuation change, and we had new financial year all in there for Optus as well. So
nice. Just to throw things.
Yeah, it is true. I know I've got a little bit of, like, you know, rocking back and forth with all the different scenarios again that we talk through. And I do think the supplier panel, you know, again, if anyone is going through this process of looking at how are they going to, you know, reinvent their contingent workforce, and if they have the opportunity to perhaps put in a VMS or whatever the case is, it was a huge amount of work to run your entire recruitment panel review RFP process. But actually, similarly to one of the examples that I said around, you know, bringing the whole teams was difficult, but actually it was a godsend. It was a little bit the same. Like, the fact that we were in a position to do a complete supplier review, we consolidated from 24 suppliers down to 17. We had great conversation and buy-in from our partners. We got so much standardization in there, and, you know, our suppliers completely understood. We're like, we want to pay you on time. We want to do business with you. We want to make this easy. But if we can create some consistency and standardization, like, this is a win-win for us. We weren't out there to go, we want to, you know, we're driving costs down and we need all this. We actually just really wanted to make things simple, easy, you know, effective, and build that sort of relationship. So the supplier panel review, again, massive piece of work, but like almost a godsend that we could do that in conjunction with the panel, because when we got to the point of almost a little mini re-implementation, I suppose, of the VMS of Beeline and Contractor Central, everything was so clean. Like, everything is so clean and clear cut, and, you know, everyone had been on the journey, our suppliers, our accounts team, our finance, our contractor folks that are working on it. It's just, so hard slog, but we that sort of phased approach, was really handy. Yeah.
And how cathartic is it to have clean data and be able to make
so good. Didn't know I was a data nerd until I started getting into it. I'm like, what else can I find out? Who's spending how much money in what business unit? Right.
I think you raise a good point there, Alissa. It's not necessarily around cost out for the business. It's around that consistency, so you can do business in an easier and faster and more seamless way, which just makes all of our lives that much simpler.
It really does. And, you know, when we did get into the data, we actually convert a significant number of our contractors into permanent workforce. They are a talent pipeline for the recruitment team. We have some fantastic conversion rates of people that come in, love Optus, do great work. The managers want to keep them, and we have great conversion. So, you know, if throughout that time that they've been there, they've been paid on time. Their suppliers are also advocates of Optus. They've had a great experience. Like, it's just so much win-win out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Which takes me on to the next question, just to move us along again. And I think there was a question raised in the Q&A around the benefits that you're starting to see today, but also the benefits that you're hoping for that will come in the next 12, 24 plus months.
So we have had the chance to recruit a brilliant Contractor Central manager who is, again, a contingent expert. And so I think with Kylie and Tatum and Dean, who are in our contractor team, we're really starting to see, some really great business engagement. So some of the benefits are we're absolutely being able to go out and partner with the business and understand their workforce strategy, give them data around trends. We're able to now start looking at market salary rates and pay rates. We're able to do comparisons against different contractor types or workforce types and help the business understand, different costs. We're working on a cost benefit analysis so that, again, our business can start going, okay, well, I understand, yes, I need to onboard somebody, but now I have all this information at my hands. How can I make sure that I'm timesheeting correctly? So I'm reducing overtime, I'm reducing risk, with people who perhaps are working longer periods of time. How do I have the visibility? Oh, I need a couple of people here to move over to another project. So now we've kind of got bench resourcing because we've got that full visibility. So there's a ton, I think, but the great engagement from the team out to the business and just helping the business be smart about their decisions around, do I need a contractor? Do I need a statement of work? Do I need to, just recruit a permanent person? How much is that going to cost? Like, we're just having really good conversations and helping them make better commercial decisions as well. So yeah, there's a lot of benefits, and certainly more to come, because as Sue had mentioned, we've really focused in on our contingent workforce, but now phase 2 for us is really getting into that services and statement of worker category and seeing what we can do to optimize that as well. So yeah, there's a pretty significant roadmap, but I don't really want to talk about if my team's on there, because I'll be like, oh, we just got through this phase.
She goes away on holiday for a week and comes back all guns blazing.
Correct.
And Sue, what about from your perspective? Anything you're seeing that's driving benefit at Optus?
Look, I think Alissa's mentioned them. We have worked with Alissa and the Contractor Central program manager and the team to map out the next 12 months, so that they can work on maintaining a level of quality of delivery to the business, the contractors and suppliers, whilst prioritising the next 2 or 3 phases of maturity.
Yeah.
And we all know that's challenging. How do you continue to transform as you're delivering? It's a balance, right? And really understanding the peaks of troughs of business. Obviously, Optus has got peaks from a contractor hiring perspective that they need to factor into that. So yeah, there's a solid roadmap for the next 12 months for where to from here. But without a doubt, the benefits realisation, looking at the value of the program and demonstrating to the business, right, what the value of having a program of this nature does for the business, for engagement of that workforce, mobility and utilisation, and time to productivity for a contractor that's in their business is really, really important. Even simple things like getting access fast, right? We all know that's hard. We know that's hard in many, many businesses. System access, laptop access, building access. So supporting that, the Contractor Central team spread, that whole spectrum, right? So getting the basics right is really, really critical from a contractor engagement perspective.
I'm sure Andrew from my team is probably nodding excessively now, Sue.
Yeah, I'm sure people from... That's a really good segue. Did you know that next poll was coming, Rob? Come on.
Let's go for it, Sue.
Let's do it, shall we? Let me see if I can work this system. So the next question, guys, we just want to gauge a level of maturity in relation to... sorry, there's a lot of information there, and I probably should have typed a little bit more shorthand on the poll here, but if you can just give us an indication of the level of maturity of your contingent workforce, that would be great. I would say, I don't know about you, Alissa, you're probably sitting between moderate and quite mature now for that category, or for the contingent workers. That's my take.
No, I think so as well. I think one of the great things, which is a luxury, I know, having worked in other organisations, our supplier compliance is really quite great. We don't have leaders, very rarely, going outside of our panel. The business behaviour is they come straight to our team, and our team are the ones that gives them the advice on who to go to, how to do it, what the best approach would be. So I think the supplier engagement and panel and compliance is great. I think obviously we've had 12 months of really working through to make sure we're at that maturity around compliance and supplier and contractor experience. And I can say that we do have a vision, which I see is under quite mature. For 12 months ago, it was a little bit of survival, but now we definitely have a strong roadmap. So I think we've gotten to that more mature phase. But again, as we've said, that resource tracking and services piece is the next phase.
Yeah, and I think that's where I see the differences. I mean, I have the luxury, and my team have the luxury of touching many businesses at different levels of maturity, and you could almost gauge that maturity based on those different worker segments as well. A very different process of engagement and contracting for service workers and service providers. But these people are humans in our business, so how do we humanise that and not commoditise that is really, really important. So that's one of my personal missions over this next sort of phase of my time in this space of how to bring that whole picture to the table, really.
Yep.
And it's nice to see from those results, Sue, that a lot of us are in the same bucket, right? We've got a long way to go with an area of TA that is excessively complex and changing all the time as well.
Yeah. Rob, I might just answer a couple of questions because I can hit them pretty fast.
Sure.
One of them was, or a couple of them around the independent consultants. Who's the employer of record and how are they onboarded and how do they work at Optus? I guess essentially they're through a couple of payroll providers. So anyone that works for Optus is either through the resource tracking function of Beeline, or if they're in that true contingent space, they're either directly supplied through one of the agency panel or through a payroll provider. So it's completely visible and consistent regardless of how they come on board, which is good to see. But in saying that, going live, we found some interesting people around the business that needed to come into the program, which is pretty standard as you go live.
The classic hiding headcount in statements of work is not unique to any business environment, and we've certainly uncovered some of those through the traps, which again is one of the benefits. We have correctly classified workers, which is a big win.
Yeah. Another question around stakeholder engagement. Hey guys, look, this is a big one, regardless of whether the company's got 1,000 people or 30,000 people. I think, how do we do that? By mapping out the business sponsors and owners based on your structure of organisation, looking at your functional heads or functional requirements, as you said, Alissa, finance, HR, tech, other functional facilities that might be required to be a part of a program of this nature. Mapping them, we had a fairly big matrix, didn't we, that we mapped, that we took from the initial implementation mapping and then rolled that into the sort of the current state at that time. And that continued to change, obviously, because people move. We were in project mode for 7 or 8 months. So we all know that roles change and people come and go from organisations during those periods of time. So it was a moving feast and we needed to keep on top of that. I think that we were pretty disciplined in that, but we had a couple of moments where we thought, oh, jeeps, hang on a sec, we've missed something here. We need to go back and engage that particular stakeholder. So that is never a lock and load and forget. There are questions around risks and benefits of independent consultants. I think we've answered that. Barriers to entry are not significant, but the benefits are the speed and flexibility. The risks are visibility and then the compliance and legislative requirements that we all know from a governance perspective. So having them within a standard program and system is really, really great. Other questions relating to the selection of the technology. I guess, Alissa, that was before your time, but you've spoken quite a bit about the business case and how went down that path. Yeah.
Yeah, look, the business, Optus is, their procurement process is pretty challenging. And actually, one of the benefits and one of the things that we wanted to achieve was improve supplier relationships. Optus is Australia's most loved everyday brand with lasting customer relationships, unless you're a supplier. And we were like, okay, so we really need to fix that. So we've obviously gone through that process, and of course my dog's going to bark, so my apologies for that. Oh, and there's a delivery.
And Sullivan's there.
So I think with the vendor process and the selection process that we went through was really rigorous, huge business requirements, and yeah, thank you. And the challenge that we have is we have obviously some really significant protocols when it comes to IT procurement and whatnot. So when we went through the RFP, we had a number of people that had made a recommendation or had pitched for it. We had two main providers that sort of got shortlisted, as I'm sure you can all figure out who those two were. But there is a lot of influence that our IT, cybersecurity, HR technology teams will have. So whilst we're the users and we build the business requirements and we do the process mapping, but there is a lot of influence from a broader sort of core evaluation team, I suppose, that we ran through. So more than happy to have some conversations with folks offline about that. But again, procurement process was really quite rigorous, but we found two main providers from a VMS came through that met the requirements of all of the sort of hoops and hurdles that we need to follow for such a large corporate to get implemented. And because remembering as well, our VMS talks to a whole bunch of our other systems. And that was one of their core requirements. We didn't just want to put a bolt on that didn't speak to anything. And as you work through that process, there are a few folks that just have, I guess, the maturity to be able to answer and manage that procurement process and requirement.
Nice. One of the other questions, or there's a couple of them here around statement of work providers. Are they centrally run through the system? How does that work? I guess this is an interesting conversation because it really comes down to organisations defining what is a service worker or service provider and what is a statement of work provider. And we all know, those of you that are working in these environments, there are ways to navigate to get people into a role, into the business, and what that looks like. So I'll give it a stab, Alissa, from an Optus perspective, is that there's a very rigorous procurement framework around service providers, most definitely. And, the guided buying framework that is in place with Optus procurement does that, and it does the job that it needs to do. What is needed from a workforce perspective is visibility, and that's where the program of this nature. So if you think about, we said 600, 700 people in the system from a procure to pay, so working days or hours and getting paid, and the suppliers getting paid. Statement of work and some of the service workers, well, they're in the system so we can see them, but they don't transact. We don't transact the procurement of those at this point in time, nor do we do the invoicing. So that goes through your traditional guided buying framework. But the priority was visibility. To your point, Alissa, I remember Kate saying it a number of times. We need to know who's got to be here to turn the lights on, and the lights off every day. Where are they? And what roles are they in? From a role perspective.
And I think that's part of it. We have worked pretty closely with our procurement team as well, because often what will happen is the business goes, I need to be able to do this piece of work. And sometimes they come to us because they're really mature and they understand the type of worker that they need, or how to manage, I guess, the different sort of contractor types. Otherwise, they just go to procurement and be like, I need to pay for this and I need to do this piece of work. And we've had to work really hard with our procurement. And to be honest, it's still a bit of a work in progress, because when they're business partnering with our teams, we need them to sort of really triage and go, is this a statement of work or is this contingent? How is one employee doing a project actually a statement of work, or is that a contingent worker? So, I think it's having some really good frameworks and whatnot, but it's that consistent sort of engagement with all the people that have touch points and might be providing advice to the business as well.
There's maybe just one more. I know we've got 4 minutes left. There's a big question here, long question, so it's not that big to answer, I don't think, but one of the challenges with the self-managed program is once you've got the program in, and people like us work with you, Alissa, to get it in shape and to get it matured, not completely matured, obviously stabilised. How do you make sure you keep it current? What are you going to do?
Well, I think, lessons learned is making sure that you've got some good people around you. And certainly we've hired a fantastic Contractor Central manager, so who has her finger on the pulse. I think also making sure that you've got really good relationships, like people like Sue and others, where you can make sure that you're really keeping on top of sort of market trends and whatnot. And the reality is Beeline has been a really great partner as well. And they're sort of working with us, and we're scheduling sort of quarterly business reviews. And that's like, how are we doing? What are other people doing? What could we be doing differently? Really driving the supplier relationship as well, or particularly with Beeline. We're like, well, what are we not optimizing? What are we using at 50% versus 90%? Like, there's a piece around driving the value from the actual technology provider as well. And again, we've got a continuous improvement lens. And so we have a roadmap for 12 months. We've got a lot of business engagement. We're doing our NPS with suppliers, with contractors, with our hiring managers. So I think just through that evolution of getting feedback, making sure you're, looking at different pieces of data that's both internal and external, you're just constantly staying ahead of the game. But, who knows? We'll see. I think that it's important that, you always take a strategic approach when you put a program in place, and really do have, 2 or 3 years after, have we got it right? Are we doing the right thing? Do we need to change the model? Like, is the model still relevant for the business? So we'll continue to have those conversations as well.
One more, Rob, if I may.
You may, Sue.
Just to add to that, you're right, Alissa, all of those things are absolutely critical, making sure you got external insights. But we're also running a session next week with the entire HR community on the value of Contractor Central, right? So this is not about just a small team of people taking ownership for Contractor Central. This is about, from a people lens and a talent lens at Optus, that we're all people managers, right, in a business, and we all have responsibility. So ensuring that the HR community understand the purpose and value of Contractor Central and continue to support their learning journey as well. So that's happening next week, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, we'll be doing that internally.
Well, both, I think we've got 1 minute to go, so I will wrap it up there. Thank you for such an awesome conversation. I hope everybody on the call found that really useful. A couple of key takeaways that I noted down throughout the session. Data, the access to data really does enable some really smart decisions with your business groups and your teams. Visibility of that data is an absolute godsend. Do not underestimate the change management, the planning, and the stakeholder engagement as you're venturing into this. Get the resourcing right, both internally, but also with some great partnerships, and then make sure that the benefits are demonstrated regularly to the business. Awesome.
Well done, Bob. You've done a good job of summarising that.
Thanks, team. And thanks, everyone, for listening. I was going to say thanks for not heckling, but you're all on mute, so you can't.
Heckle in the Q&A as you depart.
And just from my perspective, Rob and Alissa, love you both very much. Great to work with, great to run a session with. And for those lovely attendees and those that haven't been able to join but registered, we'll do a shortened version of this hour session, and then we'll make sure it's available for everyone to have a look at as well. So if you need any help, you know where we are. We've got some great stories, and we've got the scars along the way to prove it. So
yes, exactly.
Go
Happy to chat to anybody
and achieve. Yes, exactly. See you guys. All the best.
All.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Bye.